While there are plenty of fantastic video games that do see the light of day, there are a few wildly promising looking titles that slip through the cracks. Those cracks being financial issues, studio acquisitions, executives believing the audience just isn't that interested, and everything in between. Whatever the case, it's gamers and the developers and whatever content creators that were so excited to see their dream realized who end up paying the price when that anticipated release doesn't end up being released. Even though the world never gave these games the chance to hit shelves, we're giving them a moment in the spotlight now. I'm Jess from WhatCulture, and here are 10 video games cancelled before their time. Number 10. Silent Hills. If we're discussing wildly disappointing occasions of teasers that were supposed to become full games but never did, we'd be hugely remiss not to mention the incredible horror experience PT, also known as Playable Teaser, that came out in 2014 and was supposed to be Hideo Kojima's Silent Hills. Not only was iconic ex-Konami employee Hideo Kojima on board, the game was set to be the 9th main entry into the celebrated Silent Hill series, starring Norman Reedus and co-directed by award-winning director Guillermo del Toro. Entertainingly, Kojima described himself as a bit of a scaredy cat when it comes to video games, but given his pedigree and the popularity of the franchise, it generated a lot of understandable hype. The game began production in 2012 and was ultimately cancelled in 2015 due to the breakdown between Kojima and Konami. A small happy ending did come in 2019 when Reedus, Kojima, and Del Toro reunited for the divisive, albeit in my opinion fantastic game, Death Stranding. At the initial time of its cancellation, Del Toro was not delicate in his response to Konami's decision, saying, quote, "It was not a gentle and ambiguous collaboration," claiming the studio had taken the game down with a scorched earth approach. Number 9. World of Darkness. If you haven't heard of World of Darkness, it might be because you're not too across tabletop RPGs. But for those in the know, it's an incredible lore-rich and deep role-playing universe that lends itself perfectly to the video game medium. While we're lucky to have a bunch of excellent vampy-type video games like Vampire the Masquerade, Vampire, and V Rising, this one easily could have risen to the top of the blood-sucking pack, but instead was left like a vamp in the dust. No, like a vamp who was in the sun and then turned to dust. That's what I tried to say. The developers of EVE Online, CCP, were all set to launch heavily into the, World of Darkness, a supernatural-riddled alternate modern reality where creatures like vampires and werewolves occupy the same spaces as humans. Renowned for its deep writing, complex lore, and various cults with wildly unique characteristics, it seemed primed for a fantastic gaming experience. Despite releasing a compelling concept art trailer that dazzled fans of the franchise, a huge round of layoffs at CCP Atlanta, in addition to the merging of CCP and White Wolf, quickly led to development crises, staff upheaval and restructuring, general disorganization, and a lack of focus. Even after a decade, so little of the core game was established, and the gameplay fell closer to Assassin's Creed than a compelling role-playing game. An absence of clear vision and game direction unfortunately meant that the game ultimately was shot in the foot before it even got the chance to get off the ground. Number 8. Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 3. Almost certainly the cancelled game on this list that hurts my feelings the most is Knights of the Old Republic 3. Spawning out of BioWare's heyday as they were creating some of the greatest RPGs the genre had ever and perhaps will ever see, Knights of the Old Republic 2 came out in 2004. And naturally, we expected to see the celebrated series would only get bigger and better. Not to mention that the series was always intended to be a trilogy, leaving the second game feeling unfinished and half-baked. Unfortunately, for a number of reasons, including the massive instability of LucasArts at the time, the buck stopped there. According to Chris Avellone, the game was set to have you continue in the footsteps of Revan, ultimately encountering the ancient Sith Lords whose power exceeds anything the player would have experienced before in the 2 games prior. You would also have been able to delve into the psyches of the game's antagonists, their place in the lore of the galaxy, and figure out their impact on the planets within it. Much like the other entries on this list, there have been a Half-Life 3 level of rumors that KOTOR 3 is actually coming, but at this point one seems about as likely as the other. Number 7. Star Wars 1313. Since we're on the topic of painful Star Wars games cancellations, let's move on to the other game I'm sure you knew was going to appear on this list, Star Wars 1313. Ouch, it hurts to even say it. This game seemed like an absolute slam dunk. A LucasArts open-world action-adventure that abandoned the Jedi-focused Star Wars trap in favor of a grittier world starring the infamous fan-favorite bounty hunter Boba Fett. Despite a compelling demo that generated a wild amount of hype, Disney's acquisition effectively killed off LucasArts and its existing Star Wars projects. In trading lightsabers and force powers for guns and practical abilities, it was a fantastic prospect at finding a new lens through which to experience an extraordinarily well-trodden property. It was also the first Star Wars game designed to be mature-rated, allowing for a different set of themes. In addition, it was suggested that 1313 would have let you embody a young Boba Fett as he explored the seedy underbelly of Coruscant. Sadly, come 2013, Lucasfilm eliminated LucasArts entirely, and by 2014, the Star Wars 1313 trademark was abandoned. Number 6. TimeSplitters 4. TimeSplitters is an iconic FPS from Free Radical Design that ran from 2000 to 2006. Now, just the year after, it was confirmed that another game in the series was set to come out by a scriptwriter who was working on the title. Despite that being the case, it was said that the game was in very early concept stages and was yet to find a publisher. Early logos and teaser trailers suggested TimeSplitters 4 would have been fairly satirical in nature. Unfortunately, Free Radical went into administration and was bought out by Crytek. And in combination with the middling reception to the studio's previous game, Haze, things were looking dire for production on the sequel. While crowdfunding, new and improved engines, and a petition were all options that were considered or put in motion in the hopes of getting the game off the ground, it was conceded there wasn't enough demand for a sequel. When Crytek also shut down in 2014, the majority of the staff was moved over to Deep Silver's Dam Buster Studios, who were responsible for their latest release, Dead Island 2. Number 5. Titanfall 3. To call Titanfall a sleeper hit wouldn't be quite correct, but given how fantastic the series was shaping up to be and what a fast and dedicated fanbase it accrued, it's a wonder a third game never came to fruition. Ultimately though, developer Respawn Entertainment were just too occupied with Apex Legends and its need for a constant stream of content, being that it's a live service game, that they couldn't dedicate the resources to the third entry in the Titanfall series. There were actually a total of 3 Titanfall-related games cancelled between the years of 2017 and 2023, the first being a collective card game, the second an online version aimed specifically at an Asian market, and a third game which would have combined the worlds of Titanfall and Apex Legends in a single-player adventure. While a number of these had potential, none stung quite as much as the disappearance of Titanfall 3, which was apparently in development for 10 months before it was canned. Allegedly, part of the decision to not proceed with the third game was due to the disappointing sales of its predecessor, but in retrospect, opting to release it in the same window as Battlefield 1 and Call of Duty Infinite Warfare certainly didn't do it any favors. While devotees of this one are still hoping that this one might make it out of the woodwork after all and will get some kind of miracle, there's still nothing quite so concrete to go on. Number 4. StarCraft Ghost. StarCraft is the strategy series that keeps on giving, but according to fans who were really looking forward to StarCraft Ghost, it didn't give quite enough. Announced in 2002, StarCraft Ghost was being created for the Xbox, PlayStation 2, and GameCube by Nihilistic Software. The stealth-focused third-person shooter popped you in the shoes of a psychic spy by the name of Nova. A sea of delays continued to push the game's release date back, and the studio responsible for the development of Ghost even changed to Swing and Ape Studios in 2004. Then the 7th generation of consoles hit, and of course development was delayed yet again as Blizzard tried to assess how they were going to bring the game onto a new generation. Though the game was still not officially cancelled in 2008, Blizzard's preoccupation with World of Warcraft and StarCraft 2 took a toll on the development of Ghost. Eventually, the major reason the game was shelved was due to the development pressure required to shift the resources from the PS2 and Xbox generation to that of the PS3. Things then took a turn for the absolute worst 12 years after the initial announcement, when Blizzard CEO Michael Morhaime confirmed the game had been officially cancelled. While sadly the game itself never hit shelves, would-be protagonist Nova is a playable character in Heroes of the Storm, and also makes an appearance in the sequel. Not to mention she even got her own backstory in novel form. It's not the game we were hoping for, but better than nothing. If for some reason you want to feel even worse though, a handful of years later some gameplay allegedly released online, so you can check that out if you like. Number 3. Battlefront 3. Unfortunately for them, this is actually the second time that a free radical design game appears on this list, but I guess it speaks to the potential their games would have had if only they'd hit shelves. Published by LucasArts, the shooter was in development since 2006 and was set to let players travel between grand space battles and ground conflicts without any load screens. Plenty of hype was generated over the game's potential, so much so that in 2007, not only was development of Battlefront 3 well underway, but a new game called Battlefront 4 was greenlit as well. Battlefront 3's deadline was pushed a year later to 2009, with LucasArts agreeing to foot the bill for another 7 months of work. But ultimately, a huge staffing restructure, mass redundancies, and change of leadership at the publisher left LucasArts with little choice but to do their best to pick up the pieces. Despite their best efforts to adapt to a new generation of consoles, design upheavals and the need for new staffing ultimately put the project on hold. The game was officially cancelled in 2008. In short, the relationship between Free Radical and LucasArts became incredibly strained, with finger-pointing from both sides. Free Radical co-founder Steve Ellis would go on to say the game was 99% finished, to which a LucasArts employee retorted, "There was 75% of a mediocre game." While EA got their hands on Battlefront later and didn't do a half-bad job of it by any means, apart from that whole microtransactions debacle, there are still modders online doing their best to recreate the dream that would have been Battlefront 3. Number 2. Sleeping Dogs 2. Yet another case of an absolute slam dunk cult classic bizarrely not eventuating in a sequel when interest was clearly rife is Sleeping Dogs. Like so many other games on this list, it was rumored that Sleeping Dogs 2 was already in development when it got the axe. Given the original game had a rich open world, a compelling story, stellar combat, and truly memorable characters, it seemed like a sequel was a sure thing. All that said, part of the reason for this was due to the sales of the first game falling short of the publisher's expectations. According to SVG, Square Enix believed that greenlighting Sleeping Dogs 2 wasn't financially viable, due to their position in 2013. Even though Hitman Absolution and the Tomb Raider reboot were a hit, the company was still losing money. Like a lot of money, specifically $61.08 million, an amount that led to the resignation of their CEO. As a result, the publisher leant back into its more reliable properties, Tomb Raider and Hitman. There was an effort to revive Sleeping Dogs 2 in the form of the free-to-play mobile game Triad Wars, but the game wasn't terribly well received and was shut down just a year after its beta launched in 2015. Number 1. Prey 2. When we're talking about Prey 2, we first need to be clear that this isn't the fantastic and underrated 2017 FPS by Arcane that was published by Bethesda. This was the sequel to the original Prey, a game that launched in 2006, headed up by Human Head Studios. I didn't mean to phrase it that way, but here we are. While Arcane's take did incorporate some elements of the originals, such as the broad themes, it's otherwise almost entirely unrelated. Prey plopped you in an alien spaceship in the shoes of a Cherokee man called Domasi Tomi Tawori, who possessed the unique ability to revive himself and also separate his spirit from his body for short periods, all in service of trying to fight the big bad, the Sphere. The game allowed you to accumulate alien weapons, utilize portals to teleport yourself from place to place, and solve environmental puzzles. It should be noted that regardless of its various successes, that original Prey itself sat in development hell for 11 years, as a result of technical problems, various key staffers leaving the project, and even meeting an indefinite hold. Eventually, the game was pulled together with a tiny 30-person team. Despite receiving overwhelming praise for its graphics and gameplay, not to mention proving to be a wild commercial success, the development of its planned sequel took an unfortunate turn. Quickly after the first game was determined to be a hit, development parent company 3D Realms confirmed that Prey 2 was on the way, with an epic E3 trailer to boot. The studio Scott Miller created a brand management group that was to oversee the sequel, while Human Head still held the responsibility of its development. In 2009, however, Bethesda acquired the rights to Prey 2 and cancelled the project, with Bethesda's Pete Hines claiming the game was not up to their standard. To add insult to injury, Human Head Studios was also disbanded, with much of their staffers moving to other Bethesda studios. Curiously, there may be more to the story, as Bethesda had shafted Prey 2 after both Obsidian and Arcane Austin before abandoning it entirely. Additionally, a Human Head employee later said that the game's cancellation was, quote, political and petty, and that it would have been a blast. So, big shame for us. That's the end of our list, but let me know down in that comment section which cancelled video game still hurts your feelings to this day, and we'll have a little sad time together in that comment section. As always, I've been Jess from WhatCulture. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. As always, if you like, you can come say hi to me on my Twitter account where I'm at Jess McDonald, but make sure you stay tuned to us here for plenty more great gaming lists.